Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports, was in town to watch Baylor open up defense of their national championship. Had a chance to visit with him right below the national championship banner that was unveiled. And he was also there for the Baylor-Oklahoma game on Saturday. Dennis Dodd joins us on Sikkim 365 Radio. Dennis, not a bad weekend for Baylor athletics, huh?
No, pretty darn good. Banner and rings on Friday, and then signature win for Dave Aranda on Saturday. Yeah, it was pretty good.
What are your thoughts about Dave Aranda and what he's accomplished? Last year, of course, was unique for so many people, but where he has them right now on the cusp of a possible Big 12 championship game?
I would be very nervous if I were a Baylor fan. The way things are moving so quickly, and I mean, you've already seen it this year where there's been, 11 coaching changes, and I think 4 of those, the person left or was fired before their third year ended. You know, it's most of that's been on ADs, but things are changing so fast where Dan Mullen can go from, being within a field goal of winning an SEC title to being on the hot seat less than a year later. That I think Dave Aranda is going to be a hot property here pretty soon for a lot of schools.
Dennis, how do you think the national perception changed on Oklahoma, if at all? Because it already seemed like the committee was kind of out on Oklahoma by having an undefeated team rated 8th.
Well, as I said before that game, it didn't really matter that they were 8th. If they had taken care of business and won those last 3 games and then won a rematch against one of the 3, because that's what it would have been, there's no question they'd be in the playoffs. They were one of the few that controlled their own destiny. A Power 5 undefeated champion has never been left out. So their chances are diminished. They're not dead. I would be talking more about Oklahoma State now than I would Oklahoma, frankly, from the Big 12 for the playoffs. But, it was, again, it was the way it happened. Baylor choked off Oklahoma. I think I used that word in my column. The lowest yardage total of the Lincoln Riley era, fewest points since 2014. Marvin Mims wasn't a factor. I mean, if you were at the game, you'd have to check the stat sheet to see if he got on the field. He had 2 catches for 17 yards, and we're talking about one of the best receivers in the Big 12. And in 2 career games against Baylor, he has 3 catches for 16 yards. So after halftime, which is when Oklahoma, to me, wore down, Baylor dominated.
Dennis, was there anything that Baylor did that surprised you? I mean, I know you've watched them at times this year, but you mentioned the way that they did it. What stood out to you from that performance that maybe was something you were unsure of or didn't know about them heading in?
Well, they really made it a point to confuse the young quarterback. No one had done that yet. To put a lot of decision-making on him. On the second interception, do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Where he kind of handed off the air? Remember that ghost handoff?
Yeah.
And then he went back and threw off his back foot to a wide-open defender and wasn't anywhere near the receiver. That kind of set it for me. And to the point that, I think I proved my point. He got taken out of the game. Spencer Rattler wasn't much better. I think that was the key to the whole thing. And they stopped the running game. You're going to have some balance against a team like Baylor, and they never could get it going.
Yeah, I kept waiting. Kennedy Brooks, who can be a guy that wears you down like he did against Texas and others, he just had no chance from carry one. What are your thoughts? And I saw this in one of your in the column. Him discussing the identity of an orphan and wanting to have the identity of being a family, burning your waffles, or middle seat on an airplane. Some of the things that Aranda brings up, to me, are just absolutely, if you're not paying attention, you miss out.
Yeah, he's so introspective, and he's so interesting that you really have to think when you're talking to him sometimes. We got him at the team hotel Friday night on camera, and you know what those things are. 3 quick questions, talk about the game, in and out, cliches, blah, blah, blah. Well, he starts going into the game plan, and I would urge everybody to go on the site and try to find it because it is archived there. He starts talking about bang and buzz players, which I have no idea what that means, but he starts describing it. He says Caleb Williams looks to the sidelines. He does a lot of lookovers, and that's because Lincoln wants him to because he's so young, because Spencer Rattler, never did that. That's damn interesting stuff to me for a random interview on a Friday night at the team hotel. And so that's, maybe he'll change. Maybe he'll get more, conservative as time goes on in his career. But now, to me, I think he's fascinating. He's unbelievable.
I got to admit, and I've said this before, when I first met him, the first day he was introduced, and I remember it was mainly about the moment, but there are times early on where I had to kind of make sure, well, one, I always want to make sure I'm prepared, but now I look forward to sitting down with him. Not that I didn't before, but I really can't wait to pick and choose some of the things that he brought up in his press conferences. Yeah, there are those people in life and in coaching that really like to engage, and they really feel like they have something to say. Dave Aranda is one of those guys, and we never knew it because I think this was the case. The assistants weren't allowed to talk at LSU. I don't remember his time at Wisconsin, although he was a great coordinator there as well. And that's a darn shame. The last time I had talked to him in person was on the floor of the Superdome after they won the championship in 19, and he was standing by himself in the middle of this unbelievable celebration. I went over and started asking him questions, and it was more of the same than what we're talking about. He's happy for the players. I have to go back and look at the quotes, but he was really good in the moment where everything's flying, bullets are flying, celebration, people, cigars, money at that point from OBJ on the field. And it was fun. He's a damn interesting guy.
So I know that Aranda is going to continue to get a lot of USC mention or LSU mention, just kind of depending on how this goes. But Dennis, how much are you hearing about Jeff Grimes and how he's being viewed around coaching circles? Yeah,
I had him at one of the candidates at Washington, and I'm trying to remember if there was any connection there. I don't think there was, because most of the guys on that list had connections in the West. But yeah, Jeff Grimes obviously was at BYU and had that great season with Zach Wilson last year, where they'd set a lot of offensive records at BYU. So that's in the West, and I think he'll and doing what he has done at Baylor, frankly, I think will help a lot. So yeah, I had him at Washington, not necessarily getting the job, but one of the hot candidates.
Dennis, what do you think about the way coaching, hiring and firing is going on right now? We said, look, Joe McGuire is going to be involved in coaching against a team he was on the staff of a week ago in 2 weeks when they play Baylor here in Waco. But not only that, just so many coach firings early to maybe get out ahead of this recruiting cycle that is now earlier because of the early signing day and the way that it's really complicated things.
It's all about the portal and it's all about the early signing day. Everybody wants to get ahead on the portal, and everybody wants to get ahead and recruit before signing day. The irony on that is you want to get ahead of that, but you also want a guy who can handle the portal and sign a bunch of guys on signing day. So it's almost one runs into the other. So that's what it's become. And as I'm writing for tomorrow, there's been so much coaching change in the last 5 years. I went that far back that the big names are either retired analysts on TV in the NFL, or they have jobs they're happy with. I think it's going to be hard for maybe USC and LSU to hire a big name, and some others that are out there too. Not Texas, but if Florida chooses to make a move, I think it's going to be hard for them. So you got to be careful what you wish for sometimes.
You've covered Baylor. It's how I've met you. You've covered them for many, many years in different ways, different times, different stories, different eras. Your thoughts about this football program, and then watching the men's basketball team with that banner and watching their run that they made last April or March and April. Your thoughts about this Baylor athletics program and where they are in the pecking order and how they have stayed not just relevant but winning championships.
Yeah, I talked to, I forget the gentleman's name. I just met him. There was a Nike rep at the basketball game and the football game who has Baylor, and he's had them for like the last 5 years. And he told me this is the new Clemson, in that football rises up and carries everything else. Now, Clemson basketball obviously isn't a national factor, but there is that carryover at Clemson where everything now is better at Clemson. Enrollment, everything else. Baylor was always good at basketball. So I don't even know if that's a good comparison. But that's how he put it, that they've got everything in place. They've got the AD and the coaches now. They have a national championship in basketball. That's not going away. Art took them to places they'd never been before. But, Matt Rule and now Dave Aranda look like they're going to do the same thing, despite the scandal. It almost sustains itself. Matt Rule had Baylor within an overtime with a third-string quarterback of winning the Big 12 and going to the playoffs. Dave Aranda, with 2 weeks left to go in this season, in his second season after a 2-7 debut, has Baylor within shouting distance of the Big 12 championship game. So I think that speaks highly for everything that's in place there, the decisions they made to hire these people. So it's not going away anytime soon.
Dennis, I know the ending of that game was a bit wild and sloppy, but I noticed that you mentioned a while back earlier today about the Big 12 tiebreaker and what Aranda said about that late field goal. I know it had people scratching their heads at the time, but I guess you got to give the guy credit for thinking about something that most people wouldn't have had in mind in that situation.
Yeah, the depth of thought is what amazed me, and he knew he was going to get questions about it, to the point that in the post game, he said something like, well, I'm sure Oklahoma's not very happy with it. Yeah. And he left it at that. He knew there'd be blowback about running up the score. But I thought in the moment, he cared most about sending a message to his players that I'm doing this for us. And this is how much faith I have in you guys, that I think we have a shot at the Big 12 title, that I'm willing to take that on, in comparison to any long-term ramifications there may be from Oklahoma the next time we play them. Rightly or wrong. So I thought that was interesting. I do have some news to break here. Because of the games, I just talked to the Big 12 office, because of the games that were played after Baylor, Oklahoma on Saturday in the Big 12, we cannot get down to the point differential. In other words, a three-way tie would be broken in any scenario before we get to that. Mm-hmm. So nice try by Baylor and Dave Aranda, good research, but it will not be broken by point differential.
Well, yeah, when Oklahoma State scores 63, I think that kind of throws that out the window.
Dennis, how good is
it would be the point differential? Yeah, would be between the tied teams. So yeah, they had a plus 46. You're right.
Dennis, how good do you think Oklahoma State is at this point, and do you think they're getting enough credit nationally or enough attention nationally for just how good they are?
Well, they're good in a different way. We have never, and I mean never, seen Oklahoma State with a defense like this. And defense travels. That's why I was on our streaming channel today, HQ, and they asked me about the Big 12, and I said, well, Oklahoma's damaged, but you know who's got a better chance is Oklahoma State, because they're going to be ahead of them in the rankings tomorrow night. And if they beat Oklahoma twice, then they've got a heck of a shot, depending on what happens above them. Oklahoma State's 10th right now. But with a defense that has yet given up more than 24 points, has 15 sacks in the last two games, and is doing more than enough on offense, it's time to talk about Oklahoma State being the best team in the league right now. It's certainly not Oklahoma after the way they've kind of muddled around at times this year, now finally lost the game. I think it's interesting as hell. I mean, it goes against everything Mike Gundy is. I mean, it almost like, birthed itself, reborn itself. Because Mike Gundy wasn't trumpeting in August that he's going to have a top 10 defense.
I know you wrote a column on Steve Sarkisian earlier and what's going on at Texas. Your thoughts on what his reasonable path forward is to cool down his seat in the offseason, because Texas can't fire two coaches in 2 years and expect that to make everything better.
No, but if there was a school that was going to do it, it would be Texas. Yep. But you're right. I think he made now the narrative seems to be shifting it on the players. You had the Bo Davis leaked video. I think Steve Sarkisian today in his Monday press conference said there's going to be as many as 33 openings on the team. That's going to be news to the players who have those scholarships, but he's clearly going to go all in on the transfer portal and try to remake this team, which is what modern college football is. But for him to say that out loud, it's shifting the blame from anything the coaching staff would have done. Hey, we inherited bad players. such bad players that those same players went 7-3 for Tom Herman last year, and he got fired. So I'm tending not to buy that angle, but that's where they're putting it right now.
Dennis, after your comment about Oklahoma State, Donnie Hand on our chat room on YouTube, Dennis Dodd is my new favorite for the week. Going to go follow him on Twitter. So you got one more to your 100,000 or so. So
there you go.
Let me ask you again. Let me clarify what you're saying, because after the game, Oklahoma-Baylor, after the results, you're saying that there's no mathematical way for a three-way tie to come into play?
It would be right. The tie would be broken. I'm saying a three-way tie. Any three-way tie would be broken. That is a possibility in the Big 12 before it gets to that third tiebreaker. Point differential between the teams that are involved. So, essentially what Dave Aranda did at the end of the game Saturday has now been rendered moot by the results of the games, because that was an early game, by the results of the games on Saturday.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Great to see you again. It's been a while. Thank you. All right, Dennis Dodd, CBSSports.com. That's interesting, the results. Based on the results after the Baylor game and win against Oklahoma, that it would all be taken care of before you got to the third part of the Big 12 championship game tiebreaker.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad he did it. He didn't know at the time, as you said, when the results came out after their game was over, that led to that, like Oklahoma State winning in super blowout fashion. But I think Dennis, and this was something I was thinking about on Saturday, but I think he just nailed it on one exact point. Dave Aranda sent a message to his players with that decision, and I think he sent a message to Oklahoma. I think he sent a message to a lot of people, whether he intentionally did it or not. I think, yes, that was about Big 12 tiebreaker rules, but I think it was just as much about, like, we're going to line up and there's nothing you can do about it. You know what I mean? Like, I think there was a message sent to his players, most definitely, but I think there was just kind of an overall message as well of, Oklahoma's kind of been the bull in the league for a while, and I think Aranda was just like, no, we're going to kick this field goal. We're going to get point differential because we're in the Big 12 title race, and too bad. I mean, I liked the decision, and the time it was confusing as all hell because it was like, why would you do that? But then he explained it, and you're like, okay, well, that makes absolute perfect sense, and I don't know why anybody would complain about it. If you're going to complain about anything, it's just the way it was all handled and unfolded. But
he mentioned that today. Aranda mentioned how he wishes he would have been maybe a little bit more, maybe even told the officials what might happen and his team, because Gary Bohannon's walking off with his big smile, thinks it's winded down as well. But it's just one of those things.
Yeah, and you know what, I'll tell you, here's one of the things that's really smart about, because hindsight is always 20/20. Say they did get down to a three-way tie, which has happened, as we know, in the Big 12 before.
Oh, wait
and to pretend like it wouldn't happen, like, that's not going to happen again. That's kind of like, when they told Rick Perry to winterize the grid, and he's like, it'll never happen again, and then 10 years later it does. So you don't want that to happen. You don't want to be that one. So, it wound up not mattering. Oklahoma State, shredded the point differential by having a 46-point win right after they were done. But you know what? What if it come down to 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, and it's like, Baylor's out because they needed 3 more points?
Yeah. No.
Do you think Charlie Strong and Tom Herman shared a beer after that Texas game on Saturday?
Dennis Dodd wrote about that in his column. About like they probably had a chuckle, not because they're happy that Sark is losing, but because they know what goes on there. And JD Piquel was texting with me. He's doing a Chalk Talk tonight, the big one too, about the problems at Texas. I said, can you do a slide to just like take a picture of the fan and like go, this guy's mouth and all of his friends is the problem? Like, that's the biggest thing at Texas is they have to. My top 5 today is like, why do you fix Texas? Well, one of the biggest thing you got to do is you just got to get out of the way.
Yeah, you got to let the foot. Yeah, here's a quote though.